Hello, and welcome to the July 2025 meeting of Triangle Association of Freelancers. My name is Don Vaughan. I'm a freelance writer, and I'm going to talk this evening about a couple of issues that I think are very important to writers. I've got two relatively brief educational talks that I want to give this evening, and the first one is about the Writer's Field Guide to Editors, which is an article that I wrote for Writer's Digest a few years ago. I've been writing for a very long time. And over that period, I have worked for a lot of editors, probably hundreds over the course of my career, both for the organizations I wrote for and also as a freelance writer. And as a writer, if you stay in the business long enough, you'll find yourself working for a lot of editors also. Now, editors are just human beings. They're regular people like we are. But and because of that, they have personality quirks. All of us have personality quirks. And so what I did is I basically broke this down into five basic archetype of editor personalities. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that. I'll share some personal stories. And at the end of this session, if you all have some stories about editors you've worked with, I'd like to hear that as well. So the first editor that we're going to talk about is the withholder. Okay. Typically short on details when making an assignment, the withholder can be among the most frustrating editors a writer will work for. Even if they know what they want, they have difficulty conveying it and frequently leaving the writer to struggle for direction. The resulting article may be in the ballpark, but it's not quite there, forcing the writer into unexpected and time-consuming revisions that could have been avoided with stronger editorial guidance. I don't know if any of you have had to deal with an editor like this. I have not a lot, but they are out there and they can be extremely frustrating. Now, the best way to work with a withholder is to politely demand specifics at the time of the assignment and make them give you that information then. Are you in agreement over the content of the article, the direction the article will go? How much money are you going to make? What rights are they taking? What is your word count and what is your deadline? That's the information that you need from an editor to get started on a project, but the withholder may sometimes be frustratingly low on that kind of information. So my advice is if you find yourself in that situation, take the bull by the horns, and the next time you have the editor on the phone, force them to give you that information. The next editor is the worst kind of editor, and that is the tyrant. This particular editor believes that they get the best work from their writers by brutalizing them. They yell, they scream, they make unreasonable demands. And it was because of an editor like this, a gentleman named Paul Levy, that I became a freelance writer because I was working at the National Examiner and I loved that job. I love the editors who brought me into that job. Cliff Leindecker and Bill Burt were wonderful editors, just terrific people. I enjoyed working for them. But a few years into my work there, we got a new editor, Paul Levy, who was from the National Enquirer. And he was one of those people who feels that they get their best work by screaming at their employees. He actually made some of the female editors cry. And I couldn't work under those conditions. I simply couldn't. It affected my health. I couldn't sleep. I was developing an ulcer. I was anxious constantly. I was miserable. And so, realizing that this situation wasn't going to change, I talked to Nan and made the very difficult but very satisfying decision to leave the National Examiner and freelance full time. So, even though this gentleman brutalized me and everyone else on the staff, I owe him a small piece of gratitude in that he pushed me out the door and into the career that I was destined to have. If it hadn't been for him, I might never have decided to become a full-time freelance writer. I wouldn't have achieved the success that I did, written for the markets that I did, and enjoyed my life the way I have. But if you find yourself in a situation with the tyrant, this kind of brutalizing editor, you really need to ask yourself if it's worth it. Is it really worth it to put up with this kind of nonsense for the money you're being paid? And almost always the answer is going to be no. There are other fish out there. There are other magazines you can write for. It serves you no good mentally and physically to deal with an editor like this. And I'm speaking from personal experience on this. This happens to you, walk away. You don't deserve that kind of treatment. Number three is the complete opposite of the tyrant, and that is the Ditz. Now, this is a relatively rare kind of editor, and I haven't really had to deal with them, but I know they're out there. The Ditz is a fun personality. They're great people, but they can be a challenge for writers because they're scattered and they're unfocused. They know what they want to do. Sometimes they're overworked and understaffed, which I get, but very often this negatively affects the writers that are trying to write for them because again, they're lacking information. She forgets things. She forgets to put, or I'm not going to say she, they forget to put in your invoices. They forget to pay you. They forget to send you your comps. A lot of forgetfulness here, so which means that you have to go after them all the time for the basics here that we're talking about. The Ditz is a kind of editor that you want to talk with and basically say, I need more information from you. I love working for you. I love what we're doing, but I need more from you, and I need you to please remember these very important things for me. I don't like having to chase you for this information, and you shouldn't have to do that. One of my biggest issues as a freelance writer, and I know many of you will probably agree, is editors who simply don't get back to you. And that kind of editor is the ghost. Um, and this I have found, and I've talked with other freelancers who agree, this situation is becoming untenable. I have several markets that I write for that I have a terrible time trying to reach my editors and get them to answer basic questions. And we're talking big magazines here. I often have to send 3 and 4 emails to get a word count or a deadline for a particular information. The editor has simply disappeared. In one situation, I needed info from an editor, and I had to go to 2 others within the organization in order to get it because the editor that I was working with simply wasn't giving it to me. So the ghost, it's not a bad person. They're often very busy, but you need that guidance. And so you need to have a heart to heart with the ghost. You need to sit down and explain to them why this is important. And that's what I did with one of the editors that I had this issue with. I said, you can't believe the all the effort I have had to put into to get a word count for an article. I was a response to an email that was 2 words long, and it took me weeks. It was crazy. And so, and unfortunately, being ghosted by editors is becoming increasingly common. And very often you won't hear from an editor at all if they're not interested. That is becoming a very common thing where you send your pitch, they don't want it, they simply don't respond, leaving you to wonder, did they get it? Did they get my proposal? Is it lost? It's a horrible situation. Let's talk a little bit now about the micromanager. This editor means well, but they can't help harassing their writers with nonstop advice, questions, and general nitpicking. Often a former freelance writer themselves, they believe they know best about everything and refuse to trust their writers to do their job properly. Freelancers often find the micromanagers so frustrating to work with that they walk away from the market. Overcoming the micromanager's tendency to nitpick every aspect of an assignment can be difficult. However, it often helps to have a deep conversation about a project at the time of assignment to make sure that you're both on the same page regarding the content direction and more. This will help put the micromanager at ease and, when hopes allow, you to get the job done with a minimum of editorial interference. Basically, the micromanager is afraid that you're going to forget something or you're not going to do something that you discussed. So having this conversation will reassure them that you are on the same page, you know what you're doing, you're giving him what he wants, and everybody will be happy. The mercurial. This editor isn't just quirky, they're literally unstable. Their numbers are few, but when you start writing for one, you realize it right away. The mercurial can be inexplicably mean and nasty, experience bizarre mood swings, turn wildly judgmental, and change their mind over minor matters without reason or explanation. One day you're the best writer they've ever worked with, the next day you're the worst. I Paul Levy, my editor at the Examiner, falls into this category, but there was another editor I worked with as a freelance writer. I did a lot of writing for Penthouse Forum early in my freelance career. It was one of my favorite markets. I really loved writing for Penthouse Forum. It gave me an opportunity to write on a great diversity of topics. And the editor that I worked with first, a woman named Susan Wendell Posner, was one of the best editors I've ever worked with. I truly adored her. I loved her. She was a great editor and a really nice person. When she left, she was replaced with another editor from within the company. And this person, for reasons I don't understand, was kind at first and then immediately took a dislike to me. She said no to a lot of great ideas. She nitpicked every article that I wrote for her. She accused me of falling in love with a source. It was genuinely disturbing. It really was. And I knew that this situation wasn't going to improve. And so I just stepped away from the market. I stopped pitching to Forum and I put my attentions elsewhere. I was disappointed because I really enjoyed this
A
market
minute to
greatly,
lay
but
down.
I couldn't
Oh,
I couldn't stay in that market. I simply couldn't and put up with that kind of
okay.
behavior. Luckily, she was fired about two issues in.
What's the
So,
matter?
Allison, could you mute? Excuse me. Do this real quick. Okay. And so I came back to Forum and several other editors after that, all of whom were great to work with. This one person was an anomaly, thank God, and I really haven't had to deal with personalities like that very much over the course of my career. I've dealt with a lot of quirky people, but nobody that was just that weird and disturbing on that. And it's like again, you have to ask yourself, is this something that I want to stay with? Is this something that's worth the money I'm being paid to put up with? And very often, as I did, you'll say no to that because it simply isn't. If you approach a job with trepidation and you're not having fun, then you need to step away from that because writing should be fun and freelancing should be fun and you should find it satisfying. And if you have an editor that is taking all of that away from you, then you don't want to work for that editor. You need to find somebody else. So my advice in that situation, and hopefully you'll never find yourself in that situation, but my advice is to walk away. And hopefully, as happened to me, the bad editor will leave and a better editor will come back to that market. I mentioned earlier that I've written for a lot of editors, and you'll find that if you stay with a market very long, that you likely will work for a variety of editors within that publication. I worked for Military Officer magazine for 24 years, and I worked for maybe four or five editors over the course of that period. I worked for a number of editors, an Encyclopedia Britannica. The one situation where I've worked with the same editor from the beginning is Scout Life and Paula Murphy, who's been with me from the very beginning. That is a great relationship to have and a great place to be as a freelance writer when you're working with an editor for the long term, because it really develops into a relationship in which both of you are working towards making your work as good as it can be and making the publication as good as it can be. And that brings me to our seventh editor, and that is the pro. Skilled, experienced, and always at the top of their game, the pro is the best kind of editor a writer can hope for. They love their job, enjoy helping writers make their work the very best that it can be. The pro views their contributors as colleagues rather than subordinates and works closely with them to ensure that every article is top notch. They work hard to make sure everyone is on the same page regarding an article's direction and content, explain their edits and editorial changes, and ask writers for their input throughout the process. Lastly, they provide pre-publication galleys for review, giving writers a final opportunity to make their article better still. I hope that all of you spend your careers working for this kind of an editor. And a lot of writers, especially those at the beginning of their careers, tend to look at the writer-editor relationship as a hierarchy, meaning almost like a military thing where the editor is the sergeant and the writer is the private, and the writer does what the editor tells them. And while it is the editor's job to guide the writer, the reality of this relationship is that it's a mutual situation. It's a mutual relationship in which both parties are equal. And both of them are working toward the goal of making the writer's work good and making the magazine look great. And when both of those engines are working in sync, they can't be beat. That is when truly great journalism happens. And I hope that that happens for all of you. Does anyone have any questions or comments? And I'd love to hear your stories right now. If any of you have had weird editor situations or have dealt with any wacky people like I have, is there anyone? Okay, I guess not. Anyway, editors are I will have to say that the vast majority of editors working today are great people. That has been my personal experience. I don't want to scare anybody by talking negatively and throwing these kinds of personality types out there to suggest that this is a common phenomenon, because my experience has been that it's not. The majority of editors out there are really great people, and they just want to put out a good publication, and they're reliant on people like us to make that happen. So I hope that when you are working with editors, that it's always a really good relationship and a fun relationship and a satisfying relationship too. But you will find that if you stay with a publication long enough, there's going to be some turnover and you're going to be working with others as well. I hope that that situation turns out great. I want to talk next, and this is another piece I wrote for Writer's Digest, on 5 questions that you should ask during almost every interview. Now, you all know that the interview is my favorite part of being a freelance writer. I love talking to people. I love gleaning information. I love learning new stuff. I'm just preternaturally curious about the world around me. I have a million questions about everything. So the interview is just joy for me. I love it. But over the course, I have learned that there are basically 5 really important questions that can greatly inform a nonfiction article, and should be asked during most interviews. Now, not every interview, obviously, it depends on what you're writing about and the market and your readership and other factors as well. But these 5 questions are 5 that you should keep in the back of your mind all the time, because they're important questions and they can really stimulate some vital answers from your sources. The first question is, what was your inspiration? Inspiration is the creative spark that leads to great things, the aha moment when the abstract suddenly takes form. It strikes writers, musicians, researchers, and more, anyone striving to create, build, or innovate. Almost every important accomplishment has started with a moment of inspiration, and it behooves writers to explore that aspect of a story. As a general freelancer, my work requires that I talk to people in all walks of life, from astronauts to artists to filmmakers to average people on the street. Almost always, there is an important moment of inspiration in these people's stories, and I'm eager to explore it. For example, I've talked about paleo artist William Stout a lot within the group. I interviewed for Back Issue about some of his comic book covers. And interestingly, the covers that we were talking about specifically were dinosaur themed, and they all had interesting backstories to them. They weren't just images that sprang from Bill's mind freeform. There were reflections of moments that happened to him. One of them was a near-death experience when he was doing some research in Antarctica. He was in a Kodiak boat with a researcher who wanted to go over to an ice floe to look at something, and a wave came up and almost tipped the boat over on its back. If Bill hadn't leapt forward, thrown his body literally to the front of the boat, it would have gone over and they likely would have died, because that is very cold water. In the second example, he was out with a group of researchers, and there are birds there in Antarctica called skua, S-K-U-A. They're very violent birds, and they will attack the tallest thing around them. So you always had to have a pole taller than you that would divert the birds so they wouldn't hit you physically. But one of the researchers got hit in the back of the head. Bird came up and just knocked him to the ground. And Bird didn't come out of this well either. And that was another situation that Bill was able to turn into a magazine cover. I wouldn't have gotten those great stories if I hadn't asked him what his inspiration was for those covers. So it leads to great stories and a lot of great information for your article. If you ask, where did this idea come from? What was your inspiration? What was your aha moment for this particular thing? This is especially important when you're talking to researchers, people who are doing vital research, doctors, clinicians, people who are out there doing stuff. If they're inventing, if they're innovating, you want to know what that inspiration was. What was that click? What was that aha moment that led to this remarkable discovery? You'll get some amazing stories with that question. The second question is, why is this important? Now, as the writer, we may know why a particular thing we're writing about is important because we've already done a lot of research. Maybe we've talked to some people already. So we get why this thing is important. But you need to be able to convey that effectively to the reader. And I found that one of the best ways is to ask that question of your source. And you might think, well, this is kind of a dumb question. It's obvious why it's important. But if you get this individual's insight, if you find out where their brain was going on this and why they thought it was important, again, you get some wonderful information that will inform your article. More importantly, it may allow you to be able to explain this more clearly to your readers. Explain the importance of this more clearly to your readers so that they have a better understanding. It's coming directly from the source. It's coming directly from the person who is doing this. They understand the importance and they can convey that to you so you can turn around and convey it to your readers. I do this with almost every magazine article that I do that is more than just a simple thing. If I'm talking to an expert on something on a particular topic, I always ask, why is this important? Sometimes it's, what I get isn't that useful, but more times than not, it really is. The third question is, what were the greatest challenges you faced and how did you overcome them? Everyone loves a triumph over adversity story. We always love when the little guy comes back and succeeds. And these stories are all over the place and they are in everything. They are in research, they are in writing, they are in painting, they are in science, they are in everything. Everything has a challenge to it, but some challenges are greater and some challenges aren't exactly what you might think they would be. If you're talking to a researcher and you say, what was the greatest challenge of the work that you're doing right now? He might say lack of funding. That wasn't something that was on your radar, but it's an important point. This challenge, I didn't have enough money until recently, so I couldn't do it until now. Or it might be, a lack of resources or whatever. There's a lot of challenges to what it might be. It simply could be that a technology necessary for something hasn't been invented yet. All of these challenges are everywhere, but how people overcome these challenges is a wonderful story. It's always a great story of how they dug and they fought and they clawed and they thought this way and they thought that way. And that's how they overcame the challenge on this. Those kinds of stories are wonderful. They're great. Readers love them. They can really inform an article in a really, really important way. And more importantly, it drives home the value of the subject for the writer, for the reader as well. When they understand just what went into this, it really takes on a whole different perspective for them. They come away from it with a new appreciation for what you're writing about. What do you get personally from your work? I love this question. I love this question. And you might think, well, the reader doesn't care. But actually, the reader does care because the joy and the exuberance and the sweat and tears that someone got personally from something they worked hard on and an achievement that they gained through that hard work, that's an important story. What did they get from it personally? Joy. I was able to help people. The thing that I worked on and became a reality is saving lives now. That is a remarkable place to be when you think about it. It's like, oh, I made a lot of money. That's not the answer you want on this. What do you get from it personally? It's like that question gets down to everything. That question gets down to why. Why are you doing this? What are you going to get out of it? And those kinds of answers, some of them might be mundane, some of them might be boring. It's like, whatever. But very often you will find that they're worth pursuing. There's some great insight in those particular kinds of answers of what people get personally. And you should ask yourself this question too. We're all writers here. What do you get from putting words on paper? This will help. If you answer that question truthfully about yourself, you will see why that is an important question to ask others as well. Personally, I get tremendous satisfaction from writing. It drives me. It's in my blood. It's in my genes. I can't do anything else. I have to write. I love it that much. That's what I get out of my job. That's what I get personally out of being a freelance writer. Ask that question. You will be surprised. You will be really surprised. Number 5, and this is pretty basic, but a lot of writers tend to forget this, and that is, who else would you suggest I talk to? We've got most writers, I do anyway, and I know a lot of others do, is we make a set list of sources that we intend to talk to for an article that we're working on. And so it depends on the subject too. So you might talk about talk to these people about this aspect, talk to these people about that aspect, put it all together. You've got your story on this. And so a lot of beginning writers especially refuse to deviate from that source list. It's set in granite for them. It's like, these are the people I need to talk to. I don't need to talk further. And that is a very dangerous attitude to have. If you ask source A, after your interview's done and you've talked and talked, and you say, who else should I talk to about this? He might recommend someone you've already spoken with, in which case, all right, that's fine. At least I know I'm doing the right thing. More importantly, he might say, you really need to talk to Dr. J. Dr. J is doing some of the most innovative research in this field I have ever seen. He's doing groundbreaking stuff and nobody has talked about it. That is a gift. That is a gift to a writer to get a referral like that. And best of all, when you reach out to Dr. J and say, I interviewed Dr. A, and he really strongly encouraged me to talk to you about your research, he's going to say yes. They're going to say yes. You've got that referral. You've already talked to the other guy. He knows everything is good to go. He's going to say yes. So ask that question. Who else should I talk to? And again, it might be a disappointing answer, but you might get that nugget that you weren't expecting and you didn't know was out there. And now it's been handed to you, literally handed to you to take and run with. So who else should I talk to should be at the end of every conversation that you have. So those are my 2 presentations. If anybody has any questions about either of them, I would be happy to answer them. Again, if you have any stories to share yourself from the work that you do, I really would love to hear those also. Just speak up if you have anything.
Don,
Yes, sir.
when I
Hey,
when
Drew.
I wrote when I wrote an article for Reader's Digest or Writer's Digest, I'm sorry, that you helped me to craft the letter for. It was very interesting because the editor was so helpful because she answered that question for me about who else do I need to talk to fill out the article. So a good editor will probably ask you that question.
Yes, a good editor will share that information. And that's happened to me recently, where I've got an assignment and the editor said, make sure you talk to so-and-so in addition to the others that you plan to. So you're right, Drew. Asking your editor if they've got suggestions on potential sources for the article is always a helpful thing. And almost always they'll say yes, especially if they're very knowledgeable about the subject that you're talking about, or it's something that has been covered a lot or frequently in the magazine. They've got some sources behind them that they can recommend for you. Okay. Drew, I appreciate that. Thank you, Melanie. Does anyone else have any stories? We've all been in the trenches. Well, I appreciate that. Let's move on then, because I know some of you have some good news to share. I hope that you do. Anyone have anything? Raise your hand, speak out. You got something to share? Sarah?
Washburn.
Oh, I forgot to tell people. So the it would help to tell the location of where the launch party is. I said it was at 6 p.m. for to 8 p.m. on August 8th, Saturday at Beow's Coffee, Beow. It's on Creedmoor Road in Raleigh. If you are interested in coming, you can just show up, or I have an RSVP on my homepage, sarahmerrittryan.com. But I hope you can make it. It's catered by Neomond, heavy hors d'oeuvres and baklava. So if that sweetens the
Oh,
pot, to come on over. So
Oh, you're evil, Sarah.
uh,
Thank you. Martha?
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to what we were talking about before your wonderful presentation's done.
Yes,
And
ma'am.
every time I go, oh, I really have so much more I need to learn about interviewing. But I have a manuscript from a friend of mine on my desk to review, and it says all text by natural intelligence, cover art by AI.
That's a good phrasing. I like that. I love working for editors. And I've had really meaningful friendships and relationships with a lot of the editors that I've worked with, especially those that I've worked with over the long term. And especially the editors who have brought me into a publication. But let me tell you a super quick story because probably the most important editor in my professional life was the man who hired me at the Lake Worth Herald, which was the weekly newspaper in my hometown of Lake Worth, Florida. Lentag was his name, and the Lake Worth Herald's just a little weekly newspaper. He hired me while I was still in college. I was only 19 years old. I was a journalism major, but I was still in school, and he hired me probably because he knew he could get me super cheap. But his goal was to take this small little rinky-dink community newspaper where the latest news from the Lions Club was on the front page and turned it into an actual newspaper, one that served the community and the people who lived there. And he hired me having that goal himself. And it could not have been a better training ground for me as a journalist and as a writer. And the managing editor at the Lake Worth Herald was an older gentleman named Deacon Rhodes. And Deacon was a gentle soul and a very skilled editor, even though he did not have a journalism background. He took me under his wing. When I made a mistake, and I made a lot of mistakes in those early days because I didn't know any better, he would very gently correct me and show me how to do things properly. And I learned more at the Lake Worth Herald about every aspect of being a writer and a journalist than I did in 4 years of college. If I could have just worked instead of gone to school, I would have been much better off. But the Lake Worth
mhm.
Herald was a remarkable training ground, and it was that way because of the editors above me who really wanted to make something of the publication and drew me along in the process and showed me how to do things. It was there that I learned how to write under a deadline, take photographs, write headlines, conduct proper interviews, be skeptical, ask questions to authority. That's where I learned how to do all of that. Again, I made tremendous mistakes, but when I left 5 years later, I was a seasoned journalist. Even though it was a weekly newspaper, I wrote everything, and I was ready to go when I hit the road after that. So I really owe my editors at the Lake Worth Herald everything I was able to do after that. I hope all of you have formative editors like that at some point in your career.
I'd like to add something to that.
Yes, sir.
Can you hear me? Am I
Yes, sir.
muted?
Uh-huh.
Okay. Yeah, and it's not just the good editors in the sense of the nice ones, shall we say, but the good ones who insist on a standard. I learned probably at least 2 or 3 years of journalism school and 20 seconds of being cussed at. years ago, in fact, the news editor at the News and Observer, uh, in fact, when I worked there, the whole place came out of the front page, the set, the Charlie McCarthy, Ben Hecht play, the front page with the green eye shades, the sleeve garters, the whole bit.
That was my grandfather too.
Yeah. So, and all these guys, practically all of them were World War II vets. But this fellow had been a Marine in the South Pacific. And I wrote a story about a drug bust. And I put in the story that there had been several other drug busts at the house. And I remember Bob was leaning over it and going over my story with his copy pencil. And he said, "Did you double check this with police records?" And I said, "No, Bob, the policeman I was talking with said he thought there'd been a couple other busts there before." So Bob casually marks out the line. And I go, remember, I'm 20 years old. "Bob, don't do that." And he looks up at me like, "The dog is speaking French to me. How does this happen?" And he goes, "Why not?" And then the dog really speaks French to him. I go, "Because it screws with the cadence of my prose, Bob." Well, I can still see that huge hand coming down on my copy and crunching it up, and him standing in front of other 40 people in the newsroom and screaming at me, "We don't give a flying blah, 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 blah about your blah, 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 blah prose, Haas. Do you understand me? We just don't want a blah, 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 blah lawsuit on our butts. Have you got that clear in your head?" "Yes, sir." And you know what? It pays to make sure you have covered every fact you have put down in your writing. That's one of those things, like that's why I say, that was 2 years of journalism school in 20 seconds.
My grandfather was that editor that you had. My
Yeah.
grandfather was an editor and a writer who retired from the New York Daily News while I was still in college taking journalism classes. And I've told this story. He moved down to Florida to be with my family, and he red inked my journalism homework till it looked like a murder scene. It was awful. And I learned so much from him, and I made a lot of mistakes, but I never made the same mistake twice. So
Yeah.
if you can get under the guidance of a experienced long-term editor, that is the best education you're going to have. It really is. And by the
He
way,
may have been tough, but you're right. If he's tough,
they are tough.
you
and they
learned
have to
you
be.
learned and you did not make the same mistake twice.
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, on the issue of fact checking, though, my philosophy is double check facts, triple check your math. It's always a good advice right there. Sarah?
When I went to the UNC journalism school, you got an automatic F on your news writing paper if you misspelled any name.
Oh, that's a good one.
So that was the lesson I learned. You always get someone's name right or you fail.
I made a horrific mistake. I wrote an article for Cryptology that was a profile of the UCLA Film and Television Archive in California. And I interviewed the director of the archive, the gentleman who was in charge of the collection, and the woman who was in charge of film preservation and restoration. And I misspelled the gentleman who was in charge of the collection's name throughout the entire article, and then sent him the article with those misspellings for a fact check. And I felt horrible when I realized what I had done. And it was just such a horrible rookie mistake. I apologize 6 ways from Thursday. He thought it was funny as heck, so no harm, no foul. But I still felt bad because I should have known better. I should have triple checked it, and I don't know why I did. Before we end this evening, I again want to recommend Susan Orlean's memoir, Joyride, which came out last year. I fell in love with this book from the very first page. It was so inspiring and so insightful and so informative about the profession of writing. And that's all this memoir is her professional writing career from the very beginning right up until now, talking about her books, her work with the New Yorker, her work with Esquire. It's a marvelous volume. I highly recommend that you pick it up and read it. I think all of you would really enjoy it and get an awful lot out of it professionally. It's just wonderfully written, a lot of great stories. She shares her own anxiety and her own fears early in her career, all of the mistakes she made, all of the challenges she faced. It's a terrific book. It really is. And I learned so much from it. I learned so much from it. And I just delivered an article to Writer's Digest about leads, how to write the perfect lead. And Susan Norleen talks about that at length in her book. And I quoted a couple of passages from the book in my article about that. And I also included one really, really interesting and unique lead that she wrote for an article she did for Esquire as an example in that. And I'm really happy with that. So I highly recommend Joyride. It's a great book. I think you'll love it. I really do. Does anyone have anything else to talk about before we go? Oh, Nancy? I can't hear you. Nancy, I can't hear you.
I think her microphone just might be off.
That's weird.
I can hear something, but it's like she's mumbling. So there's just no.
I don't think that's her.
I think her mic's just open and she's talking with somebody where she is. Don, thank you for the recommendation.
Oh yeah, you'll love it. Nan, you need to mute. There we go. Okay, we're good. Sorry about that. Nancy, could it be that your mic is not on? Technology.
Don,
Yeah,
do you have a moment to talk after this call?
sure.
Okay.
Do you have
I'll
a
see you
comment?
after my first million. I'd love to have good news, but I seem to have hit a dry spell.
I have a funny story about an irate farmer.
Let's hear it.
Well, I got thrown in the deep end. I started my career as a weekly newspaper reporter as well, and it was a rural coastal area. And I ran the office. It was just me and an advertising lady. I had to fill half a newspaper. It was really being thrown in the deep end, and and so I got all the complaints. I got all of it, and this farmer called me. I had covered this event, the Sheep Day event. And he called me up and said, "Very bloody funny." And I said, "What?" "Very bloody funny. The headline." I said, "What?" I didn't write the headlines. The sub-editors always wrote the headlines. But the headline was, and I hadn't even noticed, crowds flock to Sheep Day. So
That's
he
a
was
great
irate.
headline. How could he be
I know.
upset about
No, but
that?
he was upset. He thought we were making fun of farmers. And so
No, that's a wonderful headline.
I thought it was funny. Well, until a angry farmer started yelling at me at 9 o'clock in the morning. So, but
Well, generally, if I found out that when I was working at the Herald, that if we were doing our job properly when City Hall was really, really pissed at us, and that was a lot. So I felt really good about that. Once I called the city manager up so I could come over to talk to him about something. He's like, "Yeah, jump on your bike and come on over." Good times. Nancy.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I found a button that was bright orange. So sorry, it's a brand new computer. I'm still
That's
getting
okay.
God.
Oh, what do
I
you
just
want to,
wanted
oh, you ask about the omnibus.
Yeah, if anybody has number 4, I lent it out. Can't remember who. So my bookshelf has only got 1, 2, 3.
It might still be available online, Nancy. Have you
Okay.
looked?
Well, I just didn't know if somebody had bought extra copies they want to make a little dollar on. So
Oh, okay. If
I'll
anyone
check it
has
out.
an extra copy, if you want to reach out to Nancy afterward.
Thank you.
Yep. And the moral here is don't loan your books.
Or at least write down who you loaned it to. So, and I actually thought I bought 2 because I thought I gave 1 to my mother before she passed, but no, it didn't work. So.
Well, I hope that you get another copy.
And
I want to encourage all of you, if you haven't already, I hope you will contribute to the omnibus. Although I think maybe the deadline is today or tomorrow. So, but anyway, it looks like it's going to be a great volume with a lot of contributors, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Great. Yeah.
Does anyone else have anything last to talk about? All right. Well, this has been fun. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. We will see you next month. I am working on our August guest. I haven't quite nailed it down yet, but we do have September and October all scheduled. So things are looking really good. And I look forward to that. So anything good? All right, guys, we will end this. I will see you all next month. I hope you all have a great weekend coming up and keep writing.